Hello and welcome to Destination Energy webinar for people thinking about changing industry and exploring a future in clean energy. I'm Steve Barrett and I'm Director of Membership and Strategic Engagement at Energy and Utility Skills. And today we're focusing on opportunities available for people who may already have valuable experience in sectors such as oil and gas, telecoms, engineering, construction, manufacturing, automotive, and those types of careers, and may be looking for their next move. And this is an important moment. The UK's clean energy transition is creating significant demand for skilled people who can help build, operate, maintain, and modernise critical infrastructure. Our energy and utility skills strategy, which was launched last year, which covers 25 to 2030, shows that energy and utility sector will need over 312,000 new people by 2030. And that creates a real opportunity for experienced workers from other industries to bring their existing skills into a sector with long-term purpose, stability, and growth. But it's important to be clear, 2030 is not the end point for jobs in this sector. The clean energy transition creates an urgent need now, but the work does not stop when the target date is reached. Beyond 2030, the UK will still need thousands to build, and operate and maintain and upgrade the infrastructure that keeps homes, businesses, and community powered, connected, and resilient. That matters for industry changes because one of the myths we need to challenge is the idea that moving into clean energy means starting again. It doesn't. People from oil and gas, Openreach, telecoms, car manufacturing, engineering, some of the big construction organizations out there. And they are looking for some of the skills which you already have. The challenge is often recognizing how these skills transfer and understanding which roles, training routes, and employers can help make that move possible. So, for people considering a change, it's not about finding a new job. It's about seeing a long-term pathway into work that makes use of those skills and experience you already have, while giving you the opportunity to keep learning, progress, and contribute to the UK's wider journey towards a cleaner energy, more sustainable future. For industry changes, there's no single route. Some people may move directly from a similar technical, operational, project, or customer role. Others may need short conversion training, additional certification, a bridge program, an apprenticeship, a trainee pathway, or employer-led development. Some may be looking for a complete change of direction, while others may want to use their existing experience in a new environment. All these routes can lead to a rewarding career in clean energy. Key message is that you do not need to have worked in the energy sector before to have something valuable to offer. Employers need people with technical capabilities, safety awareness, problem-solving ability, digital confidence maybe, customer focus, leadership, teamwork, and most importantly, a willingness to learn. Whether your background is practical, operational, engineering-led, customer-facing, manufacturing-based, or project-focused, there may be a place for you in this sector. So what makes those opportunities especially exciting? They're not just jobs for today, they're pathways into long-term careers and industries that keep the country running and will play a central role in delivering clean power, energy security, environmental improvement, and economic growth. So today is about making those opportunities feel real for people considering a move from another industry. Not through policy language, we'll keep well away from that, so there's lots going on, or big statistics, but through honest stories from people who understand a career change, transferable skills, and retaining employer expectations, what it feels like to step into a new sector. We're joined today by three voices who can help make that transition into clean energy clearer and more practical. We're joined by James from Renewable UK, and he'll introduce himself in a second. He will help us understand the types of roles emerging across the renewable sector and the trends they're seeing. For energy utility skills standard setting function, we've got Phil, who'll be able to talk about how occupational standards can help people understand that transferability and competence in that transition pathways. And we're also joined by Brian from the Department of Work and Pensions, and we're focused on how people can be supported into sector entry, other roles where they're more advanced, and things like skills boot camps, sector-based work academy programs, and other practical routes into work. But before we do that, I just want to do a quick check as to who we have on the webinar today, just so we can do a little bit of tracking of evidence, etc. So Becky, can I ask you to pop the first slide up, please? And I'd just like you, if you could please, just to scan the QR code. And whilst you're doing that, I'll just explain the reason for doing this. What we're trying to make sure is that as we go through the process of developing these webinars to make sure that we're targeting the right areas. So the first question is, please describe your current employment status. So if you could just update that. Are you currently working, out of work, looking for jobs, considering a career move, full-time education or other, wherever that may be? Fantastic. Thank you very much. Just wait a little longer for those to come in before we move on to the next question. A really good mix there, people which are currently out of work or currently looking for something, currently working, or considering a career move. Okay. Just wait for that. Oh, still moving, still moving. 88 on the call. So where do we stop that? Shall I stop at 50? Once we've got 50 responses, I might be waiting a while. So let's keep going on those. That's quite an even mix there, actually, isn't it? So none in full-time education, which is fine. Oh, we got, well, just as I say that, somebody's gone in there. Thank you. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone, for responding. Okay, let's move on to the next question then, Becky. Thank you. Okay, for those in employment, which sector do you currently work in? So let's just understand that. We're going to get a few words coming up on here, a couple of word clouds. Telecoms, brilliant. Good to have some telecoms colleagues with us. Brilliant. Yeah, good experience in hospitality, retail, and care. Fine. Again, even if you're not in employment, I'd put it down that if you've got some experience in other areas as well. Food, retail, I can see in there. Maintenance, engineering, great. Defense. So some people looking at coming out of the armed forces there as well. Pretty high on the telecoms. Quite a few civil service in there as well. Great to have you on board. Yeah, financial services, communications, change management, excellent. Okay, so a real good mix there. And oil and gas, excellent, excellent. Okay, good stuff. Let's move on to the next question then. Thank you, Becky. Okay, for those looking for work or considering a career move, what type of role are you looking for? So we're looking for, are you at entry level, which is absolutely fine as well. Is this about, management leadership? Right up there with 70% straight away. Good stuff. Any technical roles, and that could be around engineering, technician level type roles, more of those craft skills and entry level. Okay, that's great to see. Perfect. Okay, good response there. Thank you very much. Okay, if we move on to the next slide then. And for those looking for a new or changing career, what part of the sector are you considering? So for those that you aren't aware, we've got everything from in the energy value chain, right from installing smart meters, EV charge points, solar, right the way up to transmission and distribution. So on the significant infrastructure, which you'll see across the UK. We've also got power generation. So is it around winds? Yeah, okay, winds. Biomethane, fantastic. Good to see that in there as well. Yeah, gas. Brilliant. Okay, yeah, projects. Good stuff. So a fair list in there. Solar as well. Yeah, great, great. So people may have a background in some of these. That's good to see. Thank you very much. So we've got some trends appearing at the top at the moment. Renewable, I'll get that up plus of 40, just to give us a feel about where we are. Good stuff. Good to see so many people thinking about project management, actually, because there is a fair bit of project management to be had, certainly over the next 5 to 10 years as we scale up the infrastructure. Good stuff. Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. And if we just move on, that should be it, Becky. Is that right? Fantastic. Okay. So before we go any further, then I'm just going to ask each of my esteemed colleagues just to introduce themselves. So Phil, you're top on my screen. Can I come to you first, please?
Yeah, thanks, Steve, and welcome everyone. I'm Phillip Bryant. I'm the Skills and Standards Manager here at Energy and Utility Skills. What that means is that all the work that we do to map out occupational competency and set occupational standards and be that interface between training providers, employers, and people in industry falls within my remit. It's nice to meet you all. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Phil. And James.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, James Lord. I am the Skills and Social Value Manager with Renewable UK, and I'm also the People and Skills Delivery Lead for the Offshore Wind Industry Council, or OWIC. So Renewable UK has around 500 odd members, ranging from everything from the largest developers, generators, through to consultancies and legal, HR, finance, and so on. Nice to meet you all.
Brilliant. Thanks, James. And finally, Brian.
Yeah, hi Steve. Hi everybody. So Brian McKeown, I lead our Rapid Response Service to Redundancies team within Strategic Relationship team on behalf of DWP. Very much the remit, as Stephen alluded to at the beginning. How do we move people from being facing redundancy, gain the skills to move into alternative employment as quickly as possible, while also working with departments like DESNES to look at entry points into the sector and what more we can do to ensure the domestic workforce and those who are unemployed can actually access those opportunities within a growing sector.
Fantastic, Brian, Phil, and James. So look, it's great to have you on board today. We're taking a slightly different tack to previous webinars that we've run, where we often get some new starters in, and or maybe people that have gone through an apprenticeship model. But this month we're really trying to focus in on perhaps some of those enablers, those people which will have a little bit of a input into potentially transferring people into industry. So hence the invitation to colleagues today. But look, question for each of my colleagues. For someone considering a move into another industry, what do you think that one thing you would want them to understand about maybe around clean energy transition and the opportunity it creates? Because we've talked an awful lot about where we're going as an industry and what those job opportunities are. I mentioned 312,000 around energy and utilities. So what do you think what's that one thing that people should know? James, shall I come to you first on that one, probably from a renewables perspective?
And I mean, I'm going to continue down the stats elements. I mean, 300 across clean energy full stop. From a renewables perspective, particularly for offshore wind and onshore, I mean, our stats show that there's around 55,000 people working in the wind sector, so 40,000 in offshore, about 15,000 in onshore. We're expecting those numbers to increase by a significant margin. So by 2030, we'll be looking at between 75 to 90,000 by 2030. And as you alluded to earlier, that's just a start. There will be, those jobs will continue past there. But I mean, those jobs, they're good jobs in every postcode is something that we really try to highlight. I mean, particularly from an offshore wind perspective, coastal communities, they are throughout the country.
Fantastic, James. And I know we've talked previously, there are a number of projects which are going on around those, aren't we? We won't go into those in too much detail now. We'll probably start pulling those out later on in this. But I think some of those initiatives which are just, I think it's just taking this veil off of perhaps the energy sector, because people don't understand if they're not operating in it. They don't understand it quite often. So I think that's going to be an important part, and actually just telling people about some of the opportunities that are out there. I think it's just the right direction that we should be heading in, right? So so I think that's really important. And yeah, so thanks for your insights there. And Phil, from your perspective as well, I know working right the way across that value chain, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we've been doing lots of work to understand how people can transition between workloads. And I think what we've seen is that people shouldn't assume that they're starting again when they're moving from whatever role they're currently doing into any role within clean energy. And I think it was really interesting to see that the list of sectors that people are currently working in. And somebody who's working in hospitality or care might not think that they've got a lot of transferable skills coming in, but you're working in a regulated industry, you're working in a safety critical role, you're working in an environment where teamwork and communication and being able to work and follow procedures is critical. And these are the kind of skills that employers are looking for. The employers that we are working with don't necessarily have a fixed idea as to what the ideal candidate for roles looks like or where they have to recruit from. And they're not looking necessarily for people with clean energy experience. They want people who can work safely, they can manage projects, maintain assets, operate equipment. All these things are ultimately transferable from other sectors.
Thanks, Phil. I'm glad you pulled out that heavily regulated, safety critical environment. I think that's a really important perspective on this, isn't it? And actually thinking about how people can don't often look at the core technical requirements or their core technical attributes which they have at the moment, and thinking about more holistically around that safety critical environment is quite important. So yeah, thanks for pulling that out. And I think, Brian, from your perspective, I mean, you see a shed load of transitioning people around multiple industries, don't you? So and I think you'll see a lot of transferability. But I mean, from your perspective, what are you seeing out there at the moment, and what message would you give to people on the call today?
Is don't be scared. It's very much that myth busting. We're scared of something we don't quite not know, and I think but that's also the beauty of it as well, because there's lots of jobs that are being created that will grow. It might look like something today in a job spec, but in 6 months, a year, it might look totally different. And it is that piece about transferability. Those transferable skills are key. But go away and understand more about the sector. When we're looking at the commitments, we're looking at sectors that are in decline. This is one sector that's not. This is a sector that's growing, and if we're really serious about solving youth unemployment and doing that and getting to an 80% employment rate, we have to be looking at the sectors that are growing. And in a lot of our offices, change the way we work. We have seen, especially you alluded to people working in telecoms, we know companies are reducing their headcount by 40,000 by 2030. Those people have got really good transferable skills.
Absolutely.
We need to get better at being much more proactive and not wait until that happens, and actually be working with those employers and people like yourselves and training providers and colleges, and how we can actually get that pipeline there, not just for people transitioning from one job to another, but actually people coming out of school, people who've been unemployed, breaking down a lot of those myths about what the sector actually does and what those job roles actually are. Because in the first instance, all these projects have to be built. That means the early stages it's construction workers. Yeah. So we just need to break down things into perspective and work with departments like DESNES will understand the timeline of these projects and what the end user jobs will be. I think that's key for us to plan along with in DWP and in Skills England, that planning phase as to when will things come online.
Yeah. Look, that's a great shout there, Brian. I think I think there's a real interdependency between industry, government, and God, I don't want to stray into policy here, but industry, government, but also I think it's the individual as well, because we often talk about. I mentioned it in my intro, big strategic initiatives and the big numbers which are coming down the road, and but this is about individuals getting into real people, into real jobs. and making sure that they have that a great opportunity to utilize the skills which they have for the benefit of industry and UK PLC as well. I've got young children, and I'm thinking about what does the future look like for them. I think this is a great opportunity which we should be working closely in partnership with. So look, that segues me quite nicely. If I come across to you, James, if I could. So we talked about some of the roles which people are transferring in from. But I mean, from Renewable UK's perspective, what types of roles are you seeing in demand across the renewable energy sector? And where are employers finding it hardest to recruit, do you think?
Yeah, and we've done a little bit of work identifying what some of those occupations are, and I'm happy to share this link afterwards, but there's 16 critical occupations that have been identified, particularly from an offshore wind perspective, that employers have highlighted are roles where they're seeing bottlenecks, and where we are focusing our effort in terms of attracting people into the sector. And it's through work partnership with energy and utility skills, we've fleshed that out to identify what the career pathways and transition points might be for those occupations. And I won't cover all of them because we don't have time, but I think some of the ones in particular that come to mind, and going back to Brian's point around the construction element, yes, that's absolutely true. The bulk of the jobs that we talk about, the numbers that we bandy around, yes, the bulk of those are in construction, but that's actually not where it starts. It's actually much earlier in terms of the whole planning and consenting on actually getting the projects over the line in the first place. And one of the areas in particular that is regularly highlighted is around environmental consenting. So these are specialists who are responsible for coordinating and supporting the development of consent applications. Now, without getting that, a wind farm can't actually progress to the next stage in terms of getting approval and then the construction starting. So a huge amount of effort going on around environmental consenting. We've talked about the safety element a lot, and certainly the quality, health, safety and environment workers is something that's really, really important in terms of attracting those people. A lot going on in high voltage direct current areas, so cabling, both from an offshore wind perspective, but also from an electricity networks point of view. So the grid, without the grid operating, you can't actually transfer the power that's generated from the wind turbines into the mainland. And if you can't do that, then there's no point building the wind farms in the first place. So, we have to make sure that that element actually works. And finally, wind turbine technicians. I know somebody noted that was an area they were wanting to get into. It's an area that we regularly get told that's an area they want to get into. And yes, we definitely do need them. I would point out, though, that it is just one role, and there are a large number of roles across offshore wind in particular, and I'll talk about maybe the transferability of some of those later on.
Yeah. Fantastic, James. And I think you mentioned high voltage direct current there, the connections with the grids and some of the work which is going on across transmission networks at the moment. There's significant investment. I think the last count that there was, it was around £40 billion a year to be able to hit that transition to net zero by 2030. But we talked about this goes beyond that as well, and the investment is absolutely critical, but that work can't be done by just splashing out as much money as you possibly can. That has to be done by people, and people with the right skills at the right time to be able to deliver that work. But obviously, once you've gone past that planning, consenting, construction, commissioning, and then operational side of things, there are different skill sets which are required along that trail. But many of the skills which I saw kind of flashed up in our little word cloud earlier there could all be part of that mix. And I'm not saying for a minute that it's easy to get into, but certainly around the volume and the geographical spread of a lot of these roles, it's important for people to keep their ear to the ground and certainly go and have a look at some of the websites which will kind of direct you or guide you in the right direction. Becky, I think you popped up a link to the Destination Energy website there as well. Probably worth going and have a look at that. And there are links on there which I'll show at the end anyway through a QR code. There are links to multiple job postings which are on there, and they continue to be a high level of demand across industry as we go forward to try and achieve this transition to net zero. So lots going on there. Brilliant, James. Thank you very much for that. Phil, can I come to you on a question, please? In terms of the transition pathways. Sometimes people just don't recognize how they can move across, what that pathway looks like. So from a standard setting perspective, how do you think those occupational standards, and not in too much detail about the occupational standards, if you wouldn't mind, but how can people understand what that transition pathway looks like into clean energy?
I think the work that we've been doing is trying to make what can seem like quite a complicated career change into something that's a lot easier to understand and to plan and to break down into more manageable chunks. At the core, an occupational standard will set out what someone needs to know and be able to do, and what qualifications and training people might be looking for. And when you think about some of the things that my colleagues have been talking about understanding more about the range of jobs that exist. And so if you're thinking about offshore wind, it's not just about turbines, it's also about planning and safety, and some onshore roles as well, and the environmental consenting side of things. As Brian mentioned, it's about myth busting and breaking down knowledge that might already exist. And so it's about helping people to understand that transferability. For people who considering that move, it can help them set out and understand what it is they've currently got within their job that's transferable, and how do they then go about managing those next steps. And that ultimately will help address some of the nervousness and make that transition a lot easier for all concerned, both employers and the workers themselves. And so I think ultimately what you're trying to get people to do is not see this as a completely different career or completely new start, but something that is an evolution of what they've been doing to date, the skills that they've been developing over their career, and how they can now be applying those into a different sector.
Yeah, that's a great shout again, Phil. I know we've had a number of quite focused webinars, this being the fifth, around armed forces, about skilled people transferring across apprentices. We're doing graduates next month, etc. And then each have got a slightly different route in to industry. But I think you're right. It's just capturing what that experience is and using those occupational standards as a means to test where you are at the moment, or as at least an understanding of what sorts of skills
and
needed.
To follow that example that James mentioned about environmental consenting specialists, not everyone will understand what that role is, but at its heart, it's about knowing about legislation, being able to work with different regulatory bodies, about being able to make applications and liaise with various different stakeholders, creating technical paperwork. And so there's going to be a lot of people with those types of skills that could kind of bring into that kind of role.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Phil.
And if I could quickly interject, Steve,
go,
sorry.
James.
And just another example of that. I mean, from a more technical perspective, we've spoken about the safety element of this work, and it is, it can't be underestimated just how much there is here. I met an individual who had formerly been a fire service worker in a small coastal community, volunteer fire service worker actually, where their station had been shut down. He is now working at a hydrogen storage plant. And of course, those two things don't necessarily immediately seem like related elements, but he was able to bring, of course, a really strong focus around safety and assessing risk and mitigation that's required, knowing how to write risk assessments and things like that. As you can imagine, hydrogen, highly regulated, can be quite dangerous. So he was able to bring those experiences as a fire service worker into that plant, and he was managing the plant from there. And so completely different sector, but had a core skill set that he was able to transfer across and was managing that in quite a remote community.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, James. Yeah, good insights. Thank you. And Brian, look, we talked about, people come in with skills, but quite often they don't have the right skills, or they need tweaking a little bit, or, so just thinking about that sector entry then. I mean, what sort of practical support is available for people that can explore clean energy roles, build confidence, and access training and connect with employers? What can they do in that area?
Yes, so there's a few things on this one. You'll be aware of the pilot we're doing with yourselves in EU Skills about entry points into the
I wasn't
sectors.
teeing that up, by the way.
Through the sector-based work academy program that has highlighted some challenges with the sector, and but it's also got some really good people into work. So we have got a range of programs out there. We've got organisations delivering skills boot camps in mainly mayoral combined authority areas. Do take a bit longer, but they actually are there to support people gain those extra skills that are there, and linking into employers and guaranteed interviews, which they shouldn't be obviously running without employer involvement with those providers. So there is a lot of stuff there. We've got other things we can look at. As I say, we're talking to Desnes about looking more at entry points into the apprenticeships, and with Skills England moving into DWP and National Career Service coming in from October, gives us the opportunity to actually do an awful lot more in this space in promoting new sectors, new careers, opportunities, other programs with our schools advisors. So even though, yes, we've got a cohort of unemployed people, but actually we revisit the whole role of our schools advisors. So actually, how do we get that message in, not just into that younger age, so maybe when people are making their GCSE choices, linking it to relevant labor market opportunities, and not necessarily just doing the academic route because that's what the careers advice says. Why are you doing that? Is there a piece of more but vocational training that will still lead you to the same place? So lots of things. The apprenticeships is a good one. I know there's some questions in the chat about apprenticeships. I just remember talking to an employer at an event. They had 26 apprenticeship opportunities in offshore wind. They had over 5,000 applicants. So the interest is out there. What happened to those 4,974 who didn't get that apprenticeship? How do we ensure they're still engaged, and how do we ensure they're aware of other opportunities, not just with the big players, but within that whole supply chain? But lots of opportunities. We're working with Desnes, and one of the things we did in the Humber region with one of the oil refineries that was closing down was that worked with Desnes on a training guarantee. So look at those people being made unemployed, being made redundant. What were their skills? How could we work with the college group in that area to look at what skills they would need to move into clean energy jobs? So, piece of evaluation going on in that work at the moment as to how successful it was. But lots of things we can sit and talk to any employer in any area and sit and work and devise programs like we've been doing with yourselves as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Brian. And they're all practical measures, aren't they? I think they're all kind of very aimed at that individual. I'll just do a quick shout out. If anyone is interested in, Brian, you mentioned there for the 4,000, kind of 950 or whatever that didn't get roles. What do you do with them? And we have a talent pool system within our energy and utility careers and jobs website where people can go and sign up, and actually the recruiters that operate across energy and utility careers and jobs, then they have access to that system. So all your big asset owners across the UK in energy, they will have access to that. And therefore, if you've got the right skills, then they could potentially go in there, find your CV, and then get in touch with you. So there's a two-way transaction, but also you'll get various links and connections to a lot of the webinars and the activities which are going on. So that's a really good shout because those.
To me,
go on. Sorry.
For some of I've seen there's a number of my colleagues from around the country on here. For me, that's important that we have that we're able to publicise that it's not just within job centres. It's within our youth hubs. It's within FE colleges. So that message that there's information here about how you can do this. We just need. A lot of cases is people don't know where to find the information. We need to be able to get access to that information out there as much as we can through whichever channels we've got, whether that's face to face, whether that's social media, whichever ways. We just need to grow to get that message out there. There are jobs here you can do, and one of the things we've seen back in the past that worked is that piece around creating videos of young people and people doing those jobs already. Actually, this is somebody like me who's doing that job, and this is how they got it. Can be very powerful messaging when we get that right.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Brian. So, James, back to you. Emerging trends. Are there any particular trends emerging in the sector, such as growth in offshore wind, grid connections, operations and maintenance? And I know you alluded to it earlier, but we've seen kind of trends in certain areas which are more important for people to kind of perhaps take a look at, because there's going to be a timing of these things, isn't it? You know, we talk about this grid infrastructure upgrade. If you go look for jobs now, you'd be like going, oh, crikey, you know, you told me 312,000. Where's the 50,000 of those now, at least, right? Because they're not actually, you know, a lot of them aren't there yet. But you know, are you seeing trends in some of those areas where there is growth, and where would you advise people when and how to look to find out where they are?
Yeah, and look, this is an area where you could very easily stray into a policy discussion, and I'm going to attempt not to do that. But the simple reality is, yes, you're absolutely right. There is a timing and a sequencing element to this, and there are certain decisions that have to be made at that policy level that actually has that flow-on effect to the jobs down the line. And you know, yeah, we're certainly waiting for some of those decisions to be made. But so in terms of where those jobs are, yes, referenced them earlier on. I mean, the high voltage direct current HVDC side of things, both from the grid perspective, but also just having that understanding of how to deal with HVDC is really, really important, and is certainly an area that we're seeing a lot of our members speak about, and looking at what sort of training they need to provide to enable the transition, certainly from those who have worked in the automotive industry, for example, who have done high voltage work, but it's from a mechanical point of view rather than from what we require from an offshore wind perspective. So definitely growth there. We see a huge pipeline of work that's going to be coming. We're also seeing an increasing trend, certainly, and a lot of effort from members around increasing diversity within the sector. About 22% of workers within offshore wind are female. We have a target of 33% by 2035. So, you know, there's a real focus on making sure that we have that diversity element coming through. And I think the other thing two things to highlight as well is that wind is a relatively new technology relative to others. So, you know, oil and gas has been a technology that's been around for, you know, a century or so. Wind, 25, 30 years. So it's still growing and evolving. So in terms of future skills, we're seeing a lot around dynamic cabling. So I mean, you can see the fixed bottom offshore wind from the coast. Those are actually the ones you can see from the coast are the old ones. The new ones are actually much further out that you can't see, and we're going even further out now. So the next technology is floating offshore wind, which is using some of the technology and experience from oil and gas, those floating platforms, and transferring them to a wind technology. So there's a whole technical skill requirement then that's going to be transferred into that. Robotics, AI, of course, we're not immune from that. Welding, advanced manufacturing, all of those sorts of things are growing in terms of focus. And I think the other area that I would really like people to walk away from with this, I've noticed a few points in there around apprenticeships and where to look for jobs. I mean, I think the natural inclination from a wind perspective is for people to look at jobs with the main developers. And like your story earlier on with apprentices, they are getting bombarded by people who are applying for a relatively small number of apprenticeships and are getting 10, 15 times the number of applicants for that. So yes, absolutely continue looking at the opportunities with the large developers, but also the wider supply chain. Actually go a little bit further along, because the message that we're getting from the supply chain companies is actually they don't find it as easy. They don't get as many applications. They are harder to find, do acknowledge that. And at the moment, you know, there's the Destination Energy site that will hopefully over time build up that cohort of opportunities that are there. But spend a bit of time looking at the big developers, but also who their supply chain companies. So when I say supply chain, these are the cabling companies, the companies that are supplying plant and material into those developers as part of the construction process, and then look at what opportunities they have available. Wind turbine techs is actually a really good example there. A lot of the big developers they outsource the operations and maintenance of wind turbine technician elements. So Yeah, there'll be consulting companies that will be looking
Yeah.
for those types of roles.
Fantastic. Thanks, James. And it's not one size fits all. There are multiple areas, aren't there? And I think if we go back to some of the other areas of growth, and there are market trends which will drive some of this as well. Again, I'm not getting into policy, but certainly things in the retrofit side of things. So heat pumps, EV charge points, etc., solar, PV. Even right the way across the different types of power generation, there will be various elements of transitioning or timing of transitioning, and as these things start to pick up. I mean, a good example is nuclear. For those of you that aren't aware, there are 2 nuclear power stations being built in the UK at the moment. One in Somerset, one in Suffolk in East Anglia, and there are various stages, one just starting out and the other one quite well advanced now, and the skills and the requirements which are required, as well as the not only capability but also the capacity, the number of people which are required to carry out that work are absolutely breathtaking, are mind-blowing. But we need all those skills as well as in other projects which are running consecutively across the UK. Some of the other adjacent sectors to energy, for instance, water, that we deal with quite often, is invested in £104 billion over the next 5 years in reservoirs and upgrade in pipes and infrastructure. And that goes alongside some of the major infrastructure which I talked about. I think it's about 210 billion across the energy sector for the grid upgrades and enabling that infrastructure to be able to deliver that net zero energy system. So there's a lot going on, but it takes people. It needs people. Okay, good stuff. So Phil, if I can come to you then, if I could please, just thinking about the standard setting process, and how do people get in touch with that in reality? How does so we talked about training providers can be able to use this. So someone unsure whether their existing experience is relevant, well, how do they find out about that? Is it, how do they find out if their skills are credible in the environment that they're going into?
Well, the standards that we're developing are all done in partnership with employers, and they are articulating what it is that competence means for a particular job role. So what is, in order to perform a particular job role competently and safely, the standards that we develop list these out. And what we think this will do in terms of a bit of a game changer for all concerned, both employers, workers and training providers, is shift that conversation about whether someone has worked in a particular job role in the past or whether they've got experience in that sector towards whether they've got the competence needed. So someone who's working in one field can look at their job and they could compare it to the jobs that they might be interested in, and it would show them what that difference looks like. And so they can focus on that journey. And so for all concerned, it means then that transition will focus the learning and the induction on those where those genuine gaps exist, rather than repeating a lot of the knowledge and the skills that someone might already have. We've talked in the previous questions around people not wanting to see as though starting from scratch, and they won't be, but I think the reality is that some training and induction programs treat people as though they are, and so they're repeating and going over lots of areas that they're already competent in. And so both for the worker and the employer, that's not the most effective and engaging way to induct a new member of staff in. So we want the standards to help focus on those genuine gaps. The information that we provide will be listing these both in terms of knowledge and practical skills. What is it that the new job requires, and that common taxonomy and that common language that's consistent across different sectors will allow people to make a real judgment as to what those similarities looks like and where the gaps sit. And then it will also be pointing people to what the training options might be, and so what the different routes to competence, either for someone who is starting out on their career or for someone who is transitioning from an existing parallel sector, or for someone who's coming from completely different. So what are those routes to competency? Where do the gaps sit? And what's going to be then a really cost-effective, time-efficient, engaging way of upskilling that person into that new role?
Thanks, Phil. And I think that's a really important one because I think the overtraining or the over qualification is an element in there as well. And what you talked about there is that demand-led system. So industry agreeing standards and making sure that they are pertinent to the job which is required, which I think is a really great thing to have in place. And we'll continue to work with industry on that. And that does link into what James talked about earlier. So look, thanks so much for that both. Brian, if I can come to you, please. Many of the people on the call today, they'll be thinking about, well, what can I do to engage with I don't know, local support and programs or any initiatives. So how can initiatives like Sector Work-Based Academy programs, which you mentioned earlier, skills boot camps, local job centre plus support, partnerships, all those types of really great things that you've got in place with DWP, how can they help people take their first step into the sector?
Yeah, it's that promotion of them to make sure that we're speaking to those employers to get really good quality opportunities in place, that people can see the transition, that why there's a reason for you to attend that sector-based work academy. Yes, there is a period of training on here. Yes, there is a period of work experience where you get to try what the job is. Yes, there's a guaranteed interview. There is a job at the end of this program. So it's making sure people are speaking to their work coaches, looking at what's available in the local area, what colleges and providers will go out to attract people to their programs as well. But the key bit to it all is having that employer buy-in. We're talking about the amount of jobs being created. That means the skills gaps and shortages. Employers need to meet us on this as well and work with cohorts of people to help support through to get them to those standards. How we do it, how can we do it timely, but it's making sure they align. We don't want to train people up for jobs now that might not exist for 18 months.
Sure.
It's that whole timing. It has to be right. People want to see an outcome while they invest some of their time in attending a 12-week boot camp or a 6-week sector-based work academy. They need to see that that's going to be worth their time, that there is something genuinely there at the end of it, and there is an opportunity to progress. And let's be honest, it's progressing into a good quality job that does have significant pay rises as people go through process and progress. And with the nature of the labour market, it's just a sector we need to get people in, but there is a lot more information on every program, but every employer, and there's an awful lot. So go back to the very first point, myth busting. Let's break down those barriers and myths that exist in the sector and promoting it. Should become a sector of choice for people, especially in some of those coastal areas where we know there's going to be high volumes of employment. It's a sector of choice. We need to ensure that we're educating our customers in DWP, but wider schools, colleges. We're upskilling everybody on what the labour market is actually turning into and how you can grasp these opportunities. Nothing better than somebody coming back and say, I went through this process and I've got a job and this is what we're doing, and becoming that peer-to-peer mentor.
Yeah, that is very satisfying, isn't it? Seeing someone go through that process and then come out at the end and get that job. Brilliant. Brian, thank you very much for that. Look, that's all the questions I've got for now. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to come to the Q&A session. So I'm going to look in our Q&A chat box. So we've answered, Becky, thank you very much for answering some of these already. So we've got links to the uploading CVs. Please do go and take a look at that and upload your CV if you haven't done so already. We've got a question here. My expertise in large-scale advanced metering infrastructure with a major focus on meter data management systems. Is there a pathway transition to a role in the UK? Yes, there will be. If you've got those skills already, APAM, then, or Gabriel, I should say, then yes, absolutely, there will be. That will be about you engaging directly with an employer organisation, though, to look at sponsorship, and if that role is on a list, which you can then access that. But please do. I'd suggest looking for roles which are already on some of the websites, which I'll show you in a second. And if not, I would contact those organisations directly that may be involved in that activity as well. Is there a specific time of year when apprenticeships are opened up? There's only one on the website. Yeah, it is it's a slow time of the year for apprenticeships. They are starting in September generally. So yeah, as you've written in there, James, between February, April, that's usually the time of recruiting those apprentices in. But they do go slightly further than that sometimes, depending on how successful they've been in attracting people. But I think the important thing to remember on that one is when you look at the large asset owning organizations, you may be thinking, I need to go and look at National Gas or National Grid or one of the big power network distribution organizations or one of the big wind organizations. But there is a whole raft of supply chain organizations that are also advertising for those roles. And in fact, if you went and advertised, or if you went and started an apprenticeship with one of those perhaps supply chain organizations, it's more likely that you'll be doing more of that type of activity than you would have done if you'd actually joined the asset owner, because there are all sorts of career paths associated with those types of roles. But look, go and have a look at those when they come around. They do generally open up in the new year, open up quite early. So please do go and take a look at those. But lots to go at in that space. Absolutely. Got a question from Leanne. Is there specific? Oh, I've done that. My current role, I work closely with prison leavers. So Connor Shaw, is it, from DWP? Yes, we are starting to engage with HMPPS and certainly looking at running one of these for across prison service. We're looking to do that quite locally initially, and we're going to. There are many opportunities out there for ex-offenders. In many organizations, there are some restrictions in some areas, but by and large, the energy sector is an employer right there across utilities, in fact, of ex-offenders. Becky, thanks for putting the Destination Energy website out there. We've done that. That is probably it from the questions. If I need to go back to the panelists, if you have any further questions, I would like to go back and ask. Sorry, Brian, go on. My apologies.
Yeah, I think there's one there from me from sector-based work academies from Beth. Would SRT, my team, be leading in that? That really depends. It's going to be a mix of, obviously, we're working with EU skills and some big national employers on some. However, locally, there'll be lots of other things happening, and you need to just ensure it is that mapping out and with partnership managers and recruitment consultants understanding what's happening in their local area as well. So a mixture of both. Yes, we will be working with a lot of our big national companies on devising programs like sector-based work academies, but you should be reaching out to all your local employers in the area as well.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Brian. And I've got one as well. Simon, thanks very much. Is Sector Work-Based Academy boot camps only for employers to send new recruits on? I'm facing redundancy at the end of financial year 26. I want to make the most of my time. I have time to gain any skills that would help me find a job.
So Simon, it depends where you live. I would look at boot camps in particular. Boot camps are that little bit more enhanced and are available also to people currently employed. Sector-based work academies are slightly different and normally are aimed at people who are unemployed, as they're much more entry level, whereas a boot camp's that little bit more advanced. So looking at your skills, you might want to explore boot camps first, and then later on we look at that. But again, when people are made redundant, we then go in normally, depending on the size of redundancy, and we will be doing sessions either on site or virtually to support people and let them know what their options actually are.
Fantastic, Brian. Thank you very much. So look, just to close out then, thanks to all my speakers today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you and getting some further insights into what people can and should be advised to do as they're coming towards the end of perhaps a career in another sector and they're thinking about where to go next. So thank you for that. So look, if you're watching today and you're working in another industry or recently left the sector and considering retraining or simply wondering whether your skills can be used in clean energy. I hope this conversation has shown that the sector is open to you. It needs experienced people, practical problem solvers, team leaders, technicians, project professionals, which I'm great. It's great to see so many on the call today, and people that can make a real difference. The scale of demand set out in the skills strategy is not an industry issue. It's a real opportunity for people with skills developed elsewhere. Those 312,000 new people needed across energy and utilities by 2030. They're people like you. They're not someone else. They are those planners, digital specialists, project people, people working in retail. They could be coming from any sector. Some people can move across directly, and some people may need some additional training, which Brian has been talking about, but also thinking about what Phil has mentioned about those occupational standards as well, and actually being able to target the training which you want to carry out. So, Becky, can I just ask you to pop up the last slide for me, please? And whilst Becky's doing that, I think the important thing for me is we want to improve these webinars. So if I can ask people just to pop in how they've found today's webinar, so pop the poll in there. And as we're doing that, I'll just kind of close out on the last few points. The call to action here really is, look, this is about let's keep you connected. Let's stay connected and help you find a job which is meaningful and a role in that future transition to energy net zero is achievable. There are jobs out there for people. If you're coming from oil and gas, telecoms, car manufacturing, and you consider a career in the energy sector is going to be useful to you, then please do get in touch. There is a few websites which will pop up in a second. Please do so. Go and have a look at those, and we should be able to kind of point you in the right direction. This is the 5th of 12 webinars which we have in the first series. So please do go and comment on those. Please do put take a look at the information which is in there. It is beneficial. We have case studies. There are videos of previous webinars, lots of information in there for you to take on board and just establish what potentially you could be going into in the future. It's not one size fits all. We do need people coming from other sectors. We need other people from other engineering roles coming in, but we also need all other types of staff as well. So there is definitely a career out there for you. So if we just flick on to the next slide, please. There's a question here. What else would you like to see from Destination Energy webinar series? We've taken a slightly different twist on this one, obviously not having people that recently joined the sector or are in roles currently, but it'd be good to understand if there's anything else you would like to see in these webinars. I'll just leave that up there for a couple more seconds, and then we'll pop on to the next slide. But look, there's plenty of insights and information. Please do go and have a look at the websites, which I'm going to show you in a second. We are working currently with 25 partner organizations right the way across the energy value chain that can give you more information if necessary. But this is about making sure we can actually get real people into real jobs and therefore into real employment. Yeah, good shout on the more specific stuff to sectors. Too much generic. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go and have a look at the website on the testimonies. So there are some really good case studies in there. Yeah, roles. There are live jobs which are out there. I'm not going to answer all these, obviously, but there are live jobs out there on the Destination Energy link. So please do go and have a look at those. Probably too much detail to get into in the webinar itself, but that's really good feedback. Thank you very much. Good stuff. There's a few more participants typing, so I'll wait till we get to the end of those. Okay, if you just move on to the next slide then, Becky, thank you. So look, to find out a little bit more, we have Destination Energy website. Please do go and pick up that QR code and go and have a look around that website. There are links to all the organizations which are supporting us, which are along the bottom of this page. The next webinar episode is on the 24th of September. So please do, if you want to go and have a look at that, please do go and have a look. The occupational profiles, which we talked about earlier on that QR code on the right. But look, it's been an absolute pleasure delivering this webinar to you. Thank you to my speakers, both Phil, James, and Brian. Also to Becky and Joe for supporting with the setup of this. Thank you very much, and have good days. Thank you all.